Yes.
I wrote Luke.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to our Silverdale Lutheran. See, I think I can get out here out in front and be seen as well. So, well, I guess I better not do that. Okay, we'll stay behind. This one is loud. So, everybody at home, wave at each other, at the people, and in-house. There we go. So this is a truly hybrid experience, and it's working really great. We might have a new device that we're going to employ. It's called an owl, and I set it right up there in the middle, and whoever's talking, it brings the picture to whoever's automatically, and there's only one microphone. It's right in the middle. Anyway, so I'm thinking we're gonna explore that. So I am truly excited to do this Bible study on the Gospel of Luke. We'll do some introductory stuff here in a minute. But before we do that, as we often do on our Thursday Bible study, do we have any kind of housekeeping stuff to talk about, or we're rolling along? Yes.
I think today is Melanie and Ed Cameron's 50th anniversary.
Is this the day, Melanie and Ed?
I didn't hear.
Oh, that was funny. Yeah. Karen was saying that, is this your anniversary day?
Yesterday.
Yesterday, okay.
54 years.
54 years, congratulations.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was funny because it looked like you were just like, I didn't know it was our anniversary. I love it. Yeah, so we're rolling along. Worship is great. Man, the choir was awesome last Sunday. I got to listen to it. We have 19 men at our men's retreat. It went great. We're making this work, and so yeah, I'm real excited about that. And I know, I guess this Sunday is the first Sunday where the choir recorded in the sanctuary last week what they're singing this week. And then John is putting in the people that were singing from home. And so that's for the early service folks. And then the late service folks have the choir in person. So anyway, so we're pretty fancy around here. So that's going on, men's retreat, great. Pastor Jonathan has the junior high kids confirmation retreat this weekend. On the personal side of things, my girls flew off to New York to get Becca situated. She took a new job with Peloton as a data scientist. Yeah, I need a data scientist. We all need one of those, right? But anyway, so she's going to be living in West Village in Manhattan. So she's got her apartment. So Katie and Sandy took off and got her squared away there, and so that's exciting and sad. So now I'm going to have to go to New York and visit. So anyway, no, that'll be fun. Let's see. Other housekeeping stuff. Ken Day's service is this Saturday at 1 o'clock. I think that's the housekeeping. So welcome everyone at home on Facebook and as well, and those who might be listening to this recorded. We are taking on the Gospel of Luke now after a couple-week break of our Thursday Bible study. And we are doing so, one, because it's a great book to study, but two, we are doing that because in our lectionary, we will be starting to hear from the Gospel of Luke for all of 2022, for the most part. We basically start in Advent. Oh, look at this. Whoa, I know. Okay, Kim, you get a pass, fail. Got a latte delivered. Yeah, well, yes, it's a vanilla. Almond milk. So we will start in Advent hearing from Luke. And as most of you know, we have a 3-year lectionary cycle of readings on Sunday morning. And the first one is known as Mark. The first year we look at Matthew, then the second year Mark, and third year Luke, and then we swing back around. And then they scatter John all throughout the 3 years. So that's kind of how, and every lectionary has its pluses and minuses, but those are how we get our Sunday readings. And so in Advent, coming up in November, end of November, we'll switch from what we're doing now in Mark and switch to Luke. So now, as you study this text, Sunday morning, you're going to have all this Luke stuff just living and swimming in you. So that'll be fun. All right. And welcome there, Ace. Great. So with all of that, why don't I say a prayer and we'll just launch into some introductory fun stuff. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this gathering and thank you for your word. Thank you that we can listen and just let the promises of your word wash over us today, and especially a gift to study it together. So give us your spirit. Let this time be helpful and fruitful in our walk, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I'm going to try and do something here for the people in-house. I'm going to pin my video because I want to show what's behind me. Let me see if I turn over here. So, the Gospel according to Luke. So I'm just going to give you some background. In fact, there are already some questions about this. What's behind me is what's known as P75, Papyrus 75. So we have some 4th century entire, Bibles, Greek Bibles of the New Testament and Old Testament. We have 2. One is Codex Vaticanus and one is Codex Sinaiticus, I think is the way you say it. And they were found actually just within the last 100 years. But these are from like the 300s, maybe 325, somewhere in there. The one you're looking at here is dated all the way back to the 2nd century, which is in the 100s. Okay, now it's not the entire book of Luke, but it's part of it. But the reason I put this up, what's behind me here, and you can see right there is the name Lucan. That's the L-O and Lucan. And up here, I got to do this backwards, so that's why it's slower. Kata, according to Lucan, right there. Now, guess what we find right here in this, going over here? Kata, according to and then it's euangelion. So this up here, sorry, this is kata right in the middle, and up higher is euangelion, which you recognize that word, right? What's that word for? Gospel, evangelism, evangelical. That's what that means in English. So the gospel according to kata Lucan. And then we get euangelion right here according to Ioannein, which is John. So this in P75, you we know it was a book because these are leaflets, not a scroll. Christians were the first to really use the book. I don't know that you could say that that Christians invented it, but whereas most people were still using scrolls, you'd roll it up and unroll it to move along in your book, almost all of our sacred scripture, almost all of the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament are clearly in book form, in leaflet form. As one scholar has said, this is the one place in the history of the church that we were ahead of the technological curve. And in fact, that's one reason we can see how important it was, because writings that were not considered scripture are mostly scrolls. So when we look at what's our canon now, and we look back and we see most of what's in our canon was in leaflet book form, or what's called a codex. The reason I show you what's behind me to start us off is most scholars, and this was true for probably Ethel May, and certainly true for me when we went to seminary, the first thing you learn is that our Gospels are anonymous. We don't know who actually wrote them. That church tradition tells us Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. This is, I had this drilled into me in seminary. I just accepted it. It didn't really matter. It doesn't, but it necessarily didn't matter. It certainly matters who wrote them and what their emphasis was and is and all of that. But one of the things that even in, like Mark Allen Powell, a scholar I love, in his overview of the New Testament, he makes the point, Gospels are anonymous. We don't know who wrote them, that they were attributed to these people later. Now, what you're seeing right above me is this P75 leaflet, part of it. It's just one leaflet of many, but it doesn't have all the Gospel of Luke because the first part of it was lost, and some of the leaflets have been gone, are lost, but it does have this particular leaflet that's what? The transition between the end of the Gospel of Luke and the start of the Gospel of John. What that tells you, that in this book, leaflet, this codex, they had already started to put two Gospels together. Now that's fascinating to me, because guess what? Even though it doesn't say in the opening line of the Gospel of Luke, I am Luke, the doctor physician who went around with Paul, and I'm writing to Theophilus, and we'll get to that in a minute. The most ancient manuscript we have, going back to the hundreds, 150, maybe 200 AD, says this is the Gospel according to Luke. So I don't know why this is such a big deal among scholars. I want to talk to them. And I've taught this my whole pastoral career. They're anonymous. We don't know that they're anonymous. How do we know it's not Luke? The earliest manuscripts we have say it's Luke. And then it goes into the Gospel of John. And so Evangelion kata Ioannein, the Gospel according to John, is the title of the book. And in this one, it ends the book that this was the Gospel according to Luke. Yes?
Who put the titles on there?
Well, that's the question. Who put the titles on there? We have no manuscripts of any of the Gospels where we have the beginning, okay? So this is the thing, like there's one, the manuscripts I got to see in Dublin, Ireland, We just don't have a leaflet of the beginning of any of the Gospels. Why? Well, of course, the beginning of the book and the end of the book is what tends to get lost and destroyed and whatnot, but we don't have those. But on this one, we do. And I remembered that, and I said, I got to go back and see if so maybe it was the original author. Maybe Luke said, this is the gospel according to Luke, because I'm writing it, or the gospel according to John, because John's writing it. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't communities involved in the writing of these gospels. Authors today bring all kinds of people together and talk about it and dialogue and stuff. But it's just interesting that we kind of just put that out there. Now, maybe the church later, Audrey, this is what scholars typically say. The church later said, oh, that's Luke. That before that, at some point it was anonymous. And the church kind of decided, but I would think we'd have to prove that. I mean, the evidence is more that, from the very beginning, these were known to be by these people that they say they're by. So it's kind of fun. I wanted to show you that. But just as a kind of geek out, fun, cool thing to talk about. But it's really important because Luke, and I'm going to talk about the author as Luke, writes 2 volumes. Now let me get to my screen share here, and we'll go right into the Gospel according to Luke. Let's see here. Let me put this down here. Here we go. And actually, let me put something over on the left here. Hold on one second. Let me put this little search engine over here, and we'll bring this over here so all of y'all can put, at home, you can put your squares. If you click on the gallery view, you can put some of the squares on the right, and that way you can see each other a little better. Can you see that at home okay? The scripture, yeah, it's big enough. Okay, good. All right, so this is the start of the Gospel of Luke, and one other point I wanted to make, and why I put that back there as far as according to. In our modern conversation about the Gospels, and I do this, and you may do it in our conversation, and it's fine. But we often say Luke's gospel, or Mark's gospel, or Matthew's gospel, or John's gospel. You know what? There's a slight problem in that. Because how many gospels are there? There's one gospel. And the texts themselves, which I just showed you part of them, don't say Luke's gospel. They say Evangelion, the gospel according to Luke. Now, maybe we're parsing, we're splitting hairs here, but actually it's important. Now, no question, a gospel became the name for a story about Jesus. So you can say Luke's gospel because Luke's telling us the story. But in all actuality, the early church believed there was one gospel told through 4 different eyes. And I think that's helpful to distinguish that. Again, if you listen to the History Channel or whatever on this subject on the Gospels or whatever, they're going to say Mark's Gospel, Luke's Gospel. That's fine. I might even say it. But just remember, there's one gospel, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, but it's told through 4 different perspectives. And Luke definitely has a perspective. So let's read the beginning here. And anybody want to grab a mic, or how about somebody at home? Anybody want to read that first paragraph? It's 1 through 4. You don't have to read it from this translation, but if you're reading from in-house, I need you to use a mic. So, anybody up for that? You don't want to listen to me the whole time. Stephanie, look, can you pass the mic over to Stephanie? And go ahead and turn it on. Push the on-up button up. Yep.
Dedication to Theophilus. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught.
Lovely. Were you guys able to hear that at home?
You need to speak up a little more.
A little louder? Okay. Yeah, I'll try and, let's see. Stephanie, if
I
you,
could go closer, is that
Yeah, that's okay.
It's not gonna buzz?
yeah, it's, go
Okay.
closer, but go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Keep going.
6, 7, 8, 9.
7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay. Did that make it louder or softer at home?
Better?
It made it better? Okay, let me just turn this a little more. That'll give more at home volume. Okay, no, I think it was loud enough to hear. So thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, so when you talk in-house, try and get it kind of close to your... So inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us. So this is a fascinating start to the Gospel of Luke. It's unique. All the other Gospels just start. They just go. There is no introduction as such. So, hold on one. That shouldn't hurt it. Yeah. I just wanted to turn me down a little bit. So this is the fascinating part about this is that you've got Luke kind of saying many people have tried to get down what happened in this person of Jesus. Now, is he talking about Matthew and Luke? I'm sorry, Matthew and Mark? Probably. But many is more than just a couple. So this is what gets a lot of people wondering, were there many written sources before the gospel writers wrote? So it's all conjecture, but this is what we wonder. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. So what I love about this intro is it says there was a tradition even before Luke writes. There was a oral tradition. People were telling the stories. They were passing the stories down. As I've made this point many times in classes, but this was not a haphazard kind of oral tradition. This was not telephone game where, one person tells you one thing and then you see how different it is by the time. Why? What's the difference? And believe it or not, you could go onto YouTube, you can go all scholarship, and many scholars will make the point, you can't trust that what we have in the New Testament is really what Jesus said because of the telephone game. Because look what happens when you play telephone, and you whisper one message and then somebody else whispers the thing. What's the problem with that analogy? The problem is that in oral tradition, it isn't said in secret. The only way to do it right would be you'd have to play the telephone game and have each person say out loud the message they were passing on. And let's say 4 or 5 people down, somebody got it wrong. What would you do? That's right. Wait a minute, that's not what it said. And that's why oral tradition is incredibly accurate. Because the eyewitnesses told the stories, and those people told the stories, and there was a general understanding of the story, and if somebody tried to change it, wait a minute, time out. You don't get to do that. So there was this, you can see a reference here, that there were eyewitnesses who delivered. This is a great word here in Greek. This is the word Didomai, which is give or grant, or, and in this form, the actual form of this is to hand over, to deliver. It might be used like if someone was going to be delivered to the authorities, we've handed them over, it could be used in that light. So we have had this body of knowledge and we are handing it over. That's what the eyewitnesses did. They handed it over, and they handed it over to Luke. But look, what's so cool about this is he kind of tells us his process. Okay, so it appears that there may have been even some written narratives. Many have tried to do this. And we can look at Matthew and Mark and we can see some identical stuff. I mean, it's virtually word for word between the three of them. So I won't go into the whole theory about all this because I really want to read Luke, but scholars have, we've written books and books about which gospel was first, which was second, which was third, which was fourth, of the four gospels. And when you look at them, I am convinced that I think Mark was probably the earliest, and Matthew and Luke, when they wrote, okay, they had Mark, and Matthew and Luke both, word for word took stuff from Mark when they composed their book. And because that explains best the similarities. That's why we call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the synoptic gospels. Okay? Yes, and.
Who's Theophilus?
Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to get there. Thank you, Bruce. We can't skip over that because we're going to come back to that most excellent Theophilus dude. So we've got written and oral tradition, I think, is bottom line my point when you look at the Gospel of Luke. And I love it. So guess what we hear in Luke that we don't hear? Did you know? One scholar I listened to as I was kind of prepping a little bit made a great point. He said, the Gospel of Luke is the most well-known and unknown of the Gospels. And what his point was is we all know the stories that are only in Luke. Can you name some? How about the Good Samaritan? Only in Luke. Okay. How about the birth of Jesus? No room in the inn stuff. Only in Luke. See, we know all of this, but then the stuff that's, so he said, but we really kind of ignore Luke when it's in one of the other Gospels, which was an interesting point. But we're very familiar with that. So oral and written tradition, very likely Luke has Mark before him. And then finally, just real quick, so you've heard about it in case it ever happens, and I'll try and make for the folks at home. And Justin, by the way, since you're here and we're just working on this, is there a way, if Stephanie takes the mic right now, you can just turn her up for the people at home, or is that me just turning this?
Yeah, I can turn that microphone up, but yes.
Can you count off to 10?
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Keep going.
Still a little light.
Still a little light at home?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
To the left?
Live a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
She doesn't have a very deep
To
voice.
the left?
Left, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It already is.
Yeah. Check one. Okay.
I can only count that high.
Keep going, Stephanie.
Okay,
keep counting.
10, 9, 8, 7. You guys better get ready. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Give us a thumbs up
1.
at home if that's better.
Blast off.
Okay, I got thumbs up better. Thank you. Thanks, Justin. Beautiful. Okay, so now after all, I was going to explain the Q thing. So if we said up here is Mark, down here is Luke and Matthew. So both Matthew and Luke had Mark in front of them. So when I say there's a pyramid, so Mark's up here. So Mark's up here, and Matthew and Luke are down here. So they both used Mark to write their gospel. it's interesting that there's some parts between Matthew and Luke that are identical. I should have put this on a PowerPoint for you, but and so a lot of people say, since that's true, since Matthew and Luke in some places are identical, and there's nothing in Mark about those sections, there must be another source, another written source that they had in common. But guess what? We don't have it. It's lost to history. And they call it Quella because that means source. And so if you ever hear about Q in the History Channel or in A&E, when you got all these scholars up there talking about stuff, Q is just a name for a possible source, written source, that Matthew and Luke both used, that Mark didn't have. Anyway, it gets complicated, and so if this is just like, just forget it, don't worry about it, okay? But I love this because Luke says, hey, this is how I did it. I mean, I think this is just tremendous when it comes to how dependable you can come at not just Luke, but all the Gospels. But in particular, Luke goes out and finds out he went and interviewed folks. How come only Luke tells us about the birth of Jesus and the way he tells it? Evidently, he went and talked to somebody in Mary's family. I don't know. Maybe he talked to Mary herself. Maybe he talked to the mother of Jesus. Maybe, and because he says, hey, well, what about his birth and this type of thing? The other reason that Luke talks about it, really focuses in on Jesus's birth, is Luke is now, before we get to Theophilus, now we'll get to what do we know of Luke? And what we know of Luke is that he is on the pages of the book of Acts. And from that is where we get that he was a physician, first century physician, and that he is most likely a Gentile. Remember, in the scriptures, there are two divisions of people. Has nothing to do with skin color, nothing to do with whatever we might call as race or whatever, but there was Jew and Gentile. God's chosen people, and then all the rest. And there were some other divisions with all the rest, like barbarians, Scythian, you had all these things. But I'm not saying there weren't classes and people more, but when it comes to the Bible, Jew and Gentile. Well, to our knowledge, the writer of Luke, Luke himself is the only Gentile author of any of our New Testament scriptures. Most likely, everybody else was Jewish in ethnic heritage. Okay, does that make sense? So, physician, somebody that went around with Paul, so a companion of Paul, certainly acquainted with and rubbing shoulders with the apostles, with the people that were eyewitnesses. And so that's what we believe about the author of this book. So when Luke writes, we are going to see that he has a concern about the Gentile world, and we got to keep that in mind when we start studying the birth of Jesus, because all the emperors had very special birth stories. If somebody was somebody, they did not have some ordinary birth. Although Jesus did, but Luke shows us that this is something special. Okay, so now finally we get to Bruce's question. Most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. Hello, can we help you with anything?
I just bring something for the kitchen tomorrow or something.
Okay, lovely. We'll get it in the fridge. All right. So who is this Theophilus? Well, let's unpack it. Do you see the front part of the, you might recognize the front part of the name. Theo, Theos, God, and Philos. Sounds like a city in our country. Philadelphia is the city of what? There you go. So this is friend of God, literally. That's what the name means. Or lover of God, I guess you could say. Brotherly lover of God. Because philia is, remember in Greek, there's a number of different words for love. In English, we're really deficient that way. We've got love, could be all kinds of different kinds of love. But in Greek, there's a bunch of different words. Philia, eros, agape. I think there's one other actually, is for some reason escaping me. But philia is that kind of brotherly family love. So that's what his name means. Now, is that significant? I don't know. Maybe it's, but this, I think, is what's significant. Most excellent. So, most excellent is the same way in the book of Acts, and this is, we didn't even get there yet, that Roman officials of high status were introduced. I think it was, I'm forgetting some of the names, but when we hear about a person of great importance, most excellent, you just wouldn't say their name. You would say, you would give them proper honor. And in the first century world, honor was everything. And to not name somebody's position would be dishonorable, because you were also supposed to say how wonderful they are. That's what most of us, we don't realize that, because we look at it like bragging or something. But if you were an official and you came into my presence and I introduced you and I didn't say how awesome you were, that would be a major dishonorable thing for me to do. You would never come back to my get together, okay? It was upon me if somebody of high stature graced my presence, that I told everybody how wonderful this person is. Now, for us, that seems like self-serving and stuff, but that was a part of the culture. So Luke, writing this gospel to Theophilus, says, most excellent Theophilus. So there's some evidence that we get this name mentioned, that this is very likely official in the Roman world. So Luke is writing for this very particular important person, so that you who have been hearing about, and being taught about stuff, you'll know the truth about that. You'll have certainty with that. To know and recognize it's a certain knowledge type thing. Yes?
I thought I read in my Bible, the front part, that Luke was Greek, more likely Greek and educated. So would Theophilus have been, and I think you said like Luke was like a patron of his?
Yeah. So for sure. So when I say Gentile, that's what I mean. Very much a Greek, a Roman citizen, Greek, part of the Greco-Roman world. It makes total sense that Theophilus was that. And definitely makes sense that Luke was probably a patron or in some kind of relationship there. And if Theophilus was of high standard, what else would he probably have? Money. You imagine it costed some money for Luke to travel all over everywhere and write all this down. Just like a writing project costs money today, it costed money. So I bet, and again, now we get into conjecture, that Theophilus was, maybe even had, commissioned Luke to do this. But Luke doesn't say commissioned by you, but I'm doing this for you so that you'll know. Now, what's cool about this is, it's a pretty good strategy to get someone in a position of great influence and power to become a Christian. Now, let's go a little further with the Greek part, Audrey. And again, we're into the world of likelihoods and conjecture. But in Acts, so now I'll go to the next part of the introduction as we try and get a bunch of introductory knowledge here on the plate as we start. In the book of Acts, which is volume 2, in fact, let me just go there. So this is the book of Acts. So you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts in the New Testament, right? But now put Luke and Acts together. Those go together. And so in the first book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus did and taught from the beginning until the day when he was taken up to heaven after giving instructions through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen. After his suffering, he presented himself alive to them by many and convincing proofs, appearing to them during 40 days and speaking about the kingdom of God. While staying with them, he ordered them not to leave Jerusalem, and then we go on. So we're not studying the book of Acts. It's called the Acts of the Apostles. I think better Acts of the Holy Spirit, because that's really what we see. And the Spirit is sent by Jesus, according to the New Testament. So it's really how Jesus keeps working after he's been raised from the dead. And so the Spirit is doing the Spirit's work. But this is how the second book starts. So Luke and Acts, volume 1, volume 2. So if you're new to the New Testament or in the scriptures, just know that. Volume 1, volume 2. So we're going to oftentimes compare them. Well, in the book of Acts, as the word starts going out, we hear about these Gentiles, these Greeks, who are called God-fearers. That's the title, God-fearers. Now, what does that mean? Well, they're not Jewish, but maybe they're converts to Judaism. Because, that happened, and that could happen. And in the temple, of course, you could have Gentiles, the court of the Gentiles. Well, that's for the converts. That's from the people who did not have the ethnicity, I guess you could say, but they could go there. And then there's the court of the women, the court of the men, and the priests, and you have this order and these walls in between the two. And so Gentiles, even though they converted, maybe, well, what's another story in the book of Acts you think of, a famous one? The Ethiopian eunuch who's riding along, and he wants to know from Philip, hey, who is this person talked about in Isaiah 53? Who is this? So he was a God-fearer. He was somebody that had read the scriptures, knew the Jewish faith, and was looking for the Messiah. And so it's very likely then that maybe Theophilus is one of these Greek God-fearers who were familiar with the scriptures and now wondering, is Jesus the guy? Is he the Messiah? So this is what we don't know for sure because we don't hear anything about the guy. But I think that's the best description, Bruce, about who Theophilus is. Now, some other people come at it differently. Please, Doug.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to, when you are thinking about the term God-fearing, to remember often what's in that word fear. It's not just I'm afraid of God, it's awe, respect, and honor.
Yes.
Is included in that. Fear.
Absolutely.
Awe, respect,
Yeah.
and honor.
So if we, even in don't we have that in our country's history? God-fearing people, Well, it isn't like people that are so afraid of God they run away. It's respect, honor, people that are honoring, absolutely. Very helpful. Yep, right on. So maybe Theophilus is that. Please, Sharon.
I just keep getting hung up on some words. Undertaking to keep on.
Sure, if you can. That way they'll hear your question. And go real close.
Real close. Okay, compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us. Who's he talking? I mean, Jesus accomplished these things. They just were kind of like around. Who else was he talking about?
Let's see. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us. You're asking about this us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's clear. Yeah, please, Roberta, or you want to just chime in real quick?
I just wondered if he wasn't preparing
Theophilus.
for his ministry.
Absolutely. So maybe this is that he can have certainty but he's training up Theophilus. Sure. I think that's very much a part of this. It isn't just that he'll know about Jesus, but that he's going to be truly catechized, I guess you could say, or taught up and discipled. Jesus said, go making disciples. So So Luke is writing the gospel to disciple Theophilus. Now that's, Roberta, I want to go back and give another theory about Theophilus. But Sharon, I think the us is clearly assumes a Christian community. I love your question, because I really believe this, and that each of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, live in a Christian community. Not just one little church, but maybe they're in the church in Ephesus, and they're aware of what's going on in the rest of Asia Minor, but they live in Christian community. So that's the us.
He wasn't talking about back when Jesus was walking the earth at that point. He was talking about since then.
I think since then, of the things that have been accomplished among us, well, it's a both and, I would say. It's definitely what the historical Jesus did and said, but then what's been happening since. And so really the first part of the gospel, the first volume 1 is what happened back when he called the apostles and the disciples, and they walked. The second part is more current to Luke, that this is what's the Holy Spirit's doing now among us. So I think it's a both and, but it definitely assumes community. And to rightly appreciate the Gospels, a lot of people say, well, they're so different. Matthew says this, and Luke says this, and John, oh my goodness, John is so different. Well, they're writing for different audiences. They're preaching different sermons. I mean, as a pastor, I know Silverdale Lutheran well, so I think I know how to preach. Now, if I just showed up to some congregation, maybe I'll preach a message that lands, but I don't know who's fighting with who, and who's, what the trouble is here and there, and what's the struggle of this particular community. Well, these gospel writers knew they had a Christian community, and they write and they shape the story to communicate to those communities. That's why they're different. And remember what Jesus said about a good scribe? He said a good scribe for the kingdom of God brings out what's old and new from the treasure chest. I think that's kind of Jesus's way of saying, hey, you're going to be given this. It's going to be delivered to you, but now you preach it to your people. And that's what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do. So did that kind of answer? Great question. So Roberta took us to maybe Theophilus is being trained up. Well, for sure. Now, some people say Theophilus isn't actually a person. Some people say Theophilus stands for who? All y'all. You're a friend of God? Let me tell you the story. And of course, I think that's true regardless. I think for sure Theophilus was an actual person in the first century that Luke writes for. But as it turns out, I think for sure, we're Theophilus. It's now for us. So yeah, good. This word certainty is really interesting. I don't think our faith is certain in the sense of my own personal belief and my decision and commitment that wavers and struggles, but God's promise is certain. So I love that Luke says that you may have certainty concerning the things that you've been taught. Because I imagine this Theophilus person, think about the Greek gods and the Greek mythology. You guys know Greek mythology. We all know Greek mythology. We've been brought that up. Oh yeah, Kim. Yep. Were you going to say something? Joyce, please. So yeah, please.
Well, the word certainty, I think Luke is thinking he's got the tablets here. That's what bothers me a little bit.
Say some more. I don't think I understand. He's got the special tablets like from Moses type of thing?
Well, What? Say it again. Oh, I think Luke thinks the word certainty there, he thinks that he has the correct word by compiling everything that people had delivered orally and written. I think that he thinks now he's going to tell Theophilus the real word. That's what I'm getting. A little bit. It's a little arrogant, I think.
So it comes off as like, who does he think he is? No, that's good. I had never thought about it that way. He is confident, isn't he?
Yeah.
You can have certainty. Who's he confident in? He's saying, look, maybe this is a great little segue, that your question or your reaction, Joyce, which I really appreciate, to it does come off as, wow, this guy really is, all this and whatever, But maybe what else? Why might he come off that way is something I'd like to wrestle with. Let's pass the mic around to Kathy and then to Stephanie. Yeah, just leave it on. Yeah.
I think that there's a tendency for us to be more trusting of people that are like us or from our community. And so if all the other writers are Jewish and they don't necessarily relate as well to the Gentiles, maybe he's doing this so that he can say, okay, I'm like you. Here's the way it really is, from our perspective.
I kind of read it as he was chiming in, like if you tell someone something and they can't really believe it, and then 6 other people say, yeah, that's true, I think he's kind of doing it as a more evidence so that people will say, well, it must be true because he said it and he said it and he said it,
Yeah, I'm glad you used that word truth, because if you look at that word, it's truth is a synonym for it. And so he's saying, I've gathered this information in an orderly way. I've done the investigations so that you can believe that this story is true. And I think that may be more helpful than.
And also my study Bible speculates that perhaps Theophilus as a patron is going to be publishing this work or paying for it to be distributed. And so if you're going to be doing that, you want to for sure be that it's right.
Great point. So maybe he comes off so confident because, if this is going to be published, he's got to say his sources, right? Yeah.
Well, and as a physician, he's going to be a skeptic going into things too.
Maybe is helpful to think about. That's helpful to think about that as a physician, he's going to be very learned and he's going to know how important it is to name your sources and to have, a statement like that. Those are all great ways to help Joyce over there with her upset. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I think skepticism, Joyce said skepticism, I think that's a perfect word. That's what I think is underneath this. I think already there were all kinds of stuff being said about Jesus. Who is he? What did he do? And there's a need to say, this is what's true and this is what's not true. And so, yes, Luke comes off as pretty, but he has to. Because we got to get this right. This is too important. And so when you really are feeling you're saying something important, it may come off to us a little bit arrogant, like who does he think he is? But he's really, I think, just speaking his confidence in his research. Not necessarily, look at me, how special I am, but look at my work, that this is what's true here. Go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me of the book, The Case for Christ, where the guy came at it from, not that Luke came at it from an unbelieving perspective, but this Case for Christ guy, I can't remember his name, wanted to prove the case against Christ, and he came to tell the truth about Christ from his research.
Yeah. Lee Strobel, I believe, is the person you're thinking of. And he's written all series of books, Case for Christ, Case for Jesus, Case for all kinds of things now. But he started off as a journalist trying to disprove Christianity because his spouse was a devout Christian, and he was like, I'm tired of hearing about this. I'm just going to show you how wrong you are. And he became a very devout Christian. So it's a cool story. All right, beautiful wrestling with the intro to Luke. And even though we've spent a ton of time on just this first paragraph, I think it's really essential to lay a good foundation here as we start to read this gospel. Other thoughts or comments, please, Kim?
I just have a question. Is there any evidence that Matthew and Luke might have worked together, and Matthew said, I'm going to take the Jewish side and you take the Gentile side?
That is a great question. There is some evidence that Matthew and Luke were aware of each other's works. Now, not necessarily that they sat next to each other and compared notes, but here's an interesting thing. And I can't wait to really find out what's true when I get to heaven, because it's so fascinating. But there's some spots where if Mark is first, okay, you have to start with Mark being first. If you don't, then none of this makes sense. But if you start with Mark being first, there's some spots where Matthew and Luke tell the story of Mark, but one will tell it verbatim and the other will tweak it. And they usually do it, they usually both don't tweak it. One tweaks it and the other doesn't. So it's really interesting that way. So is there some evidence that Matthew and Luke were aware that they were working? Yes, I think there is. Yep. All right, good. Great question. Please, Audrey.
Would Luke's training, his education, give him more credibility than maybe Matthew or someone else?
I think definitely Luke's training as a doctor, his education, it would, and I'm just repeating Audrey's question so that you can hear it, that would bring more credibility. I think we can see some of that is in his working with Paul on the book and the pages of Acts. And the fact that he's rubbing shoulders with this most excellent Theophilus guy, very likely. I think when we look at the whole of the work of Luke and Acts, we can see that if I can sum up, it's probably the most Gentile, not only if Luke was a Gentile or a Greek, it is the most favorable to the Greco-Roman world. Another great story that's only in Luke, the centurion. Now, a lot of Jewish Christians would not want a centurion to be of great faith and the hero of a story, just like they wouldn't want a Samaritan to be the hero of a story, like in the Good Samaritan. So when you look at it, you can really see that Luke has an eye for these God-fearers, for not only the Jewish Christians, but also these Gentile folks, that he wants them to know they are a part of the mix, that they are part of it. Yeah, keep going.
You were referring to these, like Theophilus as maybe a God-fearer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, and especially like other Greek fans, maybe reading this note, because then the Greeks have lots of gods.
Yes.
They definitely fear them, but the God that you were referring to to the God Jesus is Father.
Correct. So when I say God-fearers, that they weren't just religious in the Greek pantheon of mythology and Greek mythology and gods, that they were truly fearing Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew Scriptures. Please, Kathy.
Unknowing God.
Oh, they would know who they're talking about. They would be interested in the God of the Jews. That when I say God-fearers, that's what I'm talking about. Now, when Paul speaks in the Areopagus in the book of Acts, he sees this tribute to the unknown God. And he says, hey, you guys, let me tell you about that unknown God to you. So those folks, I think he's talking, one of the fascinating things about that story, which Luke brings us in Acts, is that I think these are folks that have never heard anything about the Hebrew God, the Jewish God. They're coming from no scratch when he starts preaching to them. So that's what's interesting, because most of the time in Acts, at the beginning, the preachers are preaching to Jewish people or Gentiles who are these God-fearers, but in the Areopagus, when he's in Athens, these people don't know anything. They think that in one spot, they thought when Paul was talking about the resurrection, he was talking about some God, some different God, so they are coming at it from scratch. Kathy.
So it sounds to me like you're thinking that most or a lot of the Gentile Christians had been God-fearers before. Is that true? I haven't heard that before.
I think it's somewhat conjecture, but this phrase God-fearers is so much a part of the book of Acts in the hearers of it that yes, I believe that especially in the initial birth of the church and spreading the word, these are people that knew something of the Old Testament. Yeah, absolutely. And then as you get off to Rome and you get off to further areas where, and remember also then that even though there was the Jewish diaspora, so there were different persecutions. And then when the Romans, a lot of people, we're out of here, so we're getting as far away. And so there was a diaspora of Jewish faith and folks all throughout Asia Minor and into even at this time. So those folks are rubbing shoulders with Gentiles, and maybe they're going, hey, maybe there's something to this. And so I think definitely the early preaching to the Gentiles is a lot of folks who knew something, like the Ethiopian eunuch. And then as you get further on, that's when you're starting from scratch. And that's why also we're studying the book of Romans on Sunday morning, because I think Paul has to pull back and say, I can't assume anything. We're going to start from ground one and go. So yeah, great question. All right, good. Well, we're almost to the end of our time, but let's throw on a little, and that's okay. Like I say, I wanted to get a lot of good background stuff here. Let's put this over here. There we go. So in the days, let's go on. So notice where we start. We're not talking about Jesus yet. But in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. Okay, now, here's the other thing about the Gospel. We probably will take 3 or 4 years to study this book, now I think about it. But here's another cool thing. So Luke is very focused on anchoring this event in history. So he tells us about rulers and governors and people so that, this happened in history. This is when it happened. A lot of the other Gospels they mention people as in passing, but Luke is very clear. When we get, of course, to the birth of Jesus, which is, of course, so famous, but I'll just jump ahead for a minute. Now, which there's chapter 1 is long. In the days the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now we have records of Quirinius and governor of Syria. We know from other sources when he existed and he was a ruler. And so Luke again wants to pin this event in history. And that's an important theme of the Gospel of Luke. And so anyway, that gives me an opportunity to tell you that. Let's go right back to the start, make you real dizzy there at home. So in the days of Herod, who is Herod? Herod is the king of Judea. You think, wait, I thought the Romans were in charge. Well, the Romans put other people in charge, and especially in backwater places like Judea. If you were a high-ranking Roman official and trying to climb the ladder, you were not necessarily like, oh, I hope I get assigned to Judea. That wouldn't be much on your resume. So, but the Romans were smart too, because they found local people who were loyal to them to rule. And that is how Herod came to power, is he buddied up to the Caesars. And I won't go on and on to his background because that's a whole nother study, but Herod the Great, this is not, wait, let me think. Yes, so this would be Herod the Great here. And Herod had thrown in his lot with the Caesar that lost. I'm forgetting some of the names now. But maybe it was Mark Antony, and then, anyway, Augustus won the fight and became the Caesar. And most of the time, Herod would have been toast because you backed the wrong horse. Well, Herod was such an astute politician that he convinced the new Caesar that I'll be just as faithful to you. I'll be just as much supportive. And you know what he did to show that? Some of you have been to Caesarea Maritima, this beautiful seaport that that ships stuff to and from the Roman Empire to Asia Minor and off into the east. And who did he name it? Caesarea. He named it after Caesar. You go to that, you look at the temple that Herod built, and all that's left is the retaining wall. But what we know about it is that all around the outside, if you look at depictions of what it had what kind of columns? Roman columns in the temple. Not in the temple, but in the whole retaining wall structure. Herod was a master at buddying up and buttering up the Roman Empire to get their money, to get their support, because other Jewish folks did not like the Romans, and so they did not like Herod, and so there was this battle. And it goes back, I could go into all the history, and it's too much. But that guy, Herod, king of Judea, he was known as king of Judea, but he was put there by the Romans. There was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So these names, like the daughters of Aaron, this person is the right lineage. This is of the priestly family. And her name was Elizabeth, and they were both righteous before God. This is very, you think about, go back in the Old Testament with Samuel, and we're told that the sons of Eli, the priest of the tabernacle at the time, were corrupt. They were not righteous. And then Samuel comes along and he's talked about as being righteous, And so they were righteous before God, walked blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But, oh no, they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. So when you start talking about miraculous birth stories being important, not just from a Greek record, like I've heard some scholars say Luke invented all this just to speak to his Gentile audience. Go back to the Old Testament. What about Hannah? What about Abraham and Sarah? You know, this actually isn't just saying that something's a miracle, but it also is saying that this is God at work. This is not some human thing that God adopted. This is God's work from the very beginning. And we'll say some more of that when we get to the Virgin Mary. But they had no children. And so while they were serving as priests before God, when his division was on duty, so priests served for a time and then left, served for a time. You had a shift. So that's what that is. According to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. So what we'll do next week, because we're at the end of our time, is we'll start here and we'll look at the temple now. And we'll say, what does the temple look like? What is he doing going inside, burning this incense? And then we get to hear what happened to him when he was in the temple. And so that's what we'll jump into next week as we forge on in the Gospel of Luke. Any parting thoughts, questions? Okay. Fascinating, good. And if you feel like you've been hit by a water hose today, it's okay. Go back, watch the recording, and go, okay, you know, it takes a long time. You have no idea how many times I've listened to a podcast, like 6 times, because it takes a lot for it to sink in. So, all right, let me close this in prayer. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this time together. Thanks for the folks at home and for this technology that we can be at home and here. Be with our church as we continue to move through this era of COVID and have discernment and wisdom. And we pray in particular today for all of our healthcare folks, nurses, doctors who are so tired and exhausted as they care for so many people. So we pray that as we continue now in the Gospel of Luke, that we will come to really see how our Lord and Savior Jesus is Lord of all, including Jews and Gentiles and everyone who was far off, thought to be far off from your grace. So be with us until we meet again, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Love it. All right.
So when you go to heaven, you can look up the office and say, oh, now who did really send this to me?
Exactly. I'm going to thanks, Sharon. I'm going to find Theophilus and say, I got some questions for you. All right. Thanks, Mary. And thanks, Marge, for tuning in. Thanks, Ace. Appreciate you guys. Hang in there.
Very interesting. It goes so fast. Thank you.